My name is Iris Thorne. I am 27 years old. On a rainy Tuesday morning in April 2026, I stood in the glass-walled office of Arthur Vance, the CEO of Vantage Tech. I had been his lead developer for 4 years. I had built the very code that kept his company alive. I was there to ask for the Director of Technology role, a position I had earned 10 times over. Arthur didn't even look up from his phone as I spoke. He let me finish my pitch, then he let out a short, sharp laugh that felt like a slap. "Iris, you are a great worker," he said, finally looking at me with a pitying smile. "But let's be honest, you don't have the skills to move up. You're a builder, not a leader. You lack the executive presence we need for the big leagues." I stood there, my hands steady, even though my heart was hammering. He told me I should be grateful for my current salary and that I reached my ceiling. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and said, "I understand, Arthur." I took a step back, but it was a step he couldn't control. Because 30 seconds later, a notification hit his laptop that would end his empire. Before I tell you about the chaos that followed, let me take you back to 2020. I was 21 years old and fresh out of college. I had grown up in a small town where people didn't dream big. My father was a mechanic who taught me how to look at a machine and find the one screw that was loose. He always said, "Iris, the person who knows how the engine works owns the car." When he died in 2019, he left me a small life insurance policy of $50,000. He told me to use it to protect myself. I moved to the city and got a job at Vantage Tech. It was a struggling startup then. Arthur Vance was the founder. He was charming and loud, but he didn't know how to code. He needed me. I wrote the entire core platform in 6 months. I worked 18-hour days. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled like old coffee. Arthur called me his secret weapon. He promised me that as the company grew, I would grow with it. He promised me equity and a seat at the table. I believed him because I wanted to believe that hard work was enough to win. By 2022, Vantage Tech was worth $100 million. Arthur was flying in private jets and wearing $5,000 suits. I was still in my studio apartment, making $85,000 a year. Every time I asked about the equity he promised, he would pat my shoulder and say, "Soon, Iris. We just need to hit one more milestone." I started to realize that soon was a lie he told to keep his secret weapon from leaving. I remember my father's words about owning the car. I decided that if Arthur wasn't going to give me a seat at his table, I would build my own house. I used my father's $50,000 to start a side company called Aegis Security. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't use Vantage Tech's computers. I bought my own hardware and worked from midnight to 4 in the morning. I built a cybersecurity tool that didn't just find bugs. It predicted where hackers would strike before they even tried. It was better than anything on the market. While Arthur was busy at gala dinners, I was building a shield that would eventually become the only thing he couldn't live without. In 2023, a major bank had a massive data breach. They were desperate for a solution. I pitched Aegis Security under a fake name, The Architect. I used a voice changer for the calls. I was terrified, but I was also focused. The bank loved the software. They signed a contract for $1.2 million. Suddenly, the girl who was being ignored at Vantage Tech was the owner of $1 million company. I didn't spend a cent of that money. I didn't buy a car. I didn't buy a house. I stayed in my studio. I kept my job at Vantage Tech. I watched Arthur treat me like a servant while I was secretly making more money than his entire executive team. He would ask me to fix his printer or organize his files. I did it all with a smile. I was the invisible titan. I was the quiet mechanic waiting for the right moment to turn the key. By 2024, Aegis had 5 major clients and $8 million in recurring revenue. I was 25 years old, worth millions on paper, and still getting coffee for a man who thought I was a failure. The disrespect at Vantage Tech became a daily routine. In late 2024, Arthur hired a man named Julian Thorne to be the vice president of strategy. Julian was 30 years old, the son of a billionaire, and had never written a line of code in his life. He spent his days talking about synergy and disruption. Arthur gave Julian a $250,000 salary and a $50,000 signing bonus. That same week, I asked for a $10,000 raise. Arthur laughed and told me the budget was tight. He gave me a $100 Amazon gift card for Employee Appreciation Day and told me I was the heart of the company. I took the gift card and used it to buy a new server for Aegis. I watched as Julian took credit for my latest software update. I watched as he was featured in business magazines as the brain behind Vantage Tech's success. I never corrected him. I let him talk. I let him feel powerful. Because I knew something he didn't. I had built the Vantage Tech platform with a very specific architecture. It was a closed loop that required a specialized security key to update. And that key belonged to Aegis. By 2025, Vantage Tech was preparing for an IPO, an initial public offering. Arthur stood to make $200 million. Julian was set to make $50 million. They were planning the party at a luxury hotel in Chicago. They invited 19 of the biggest investors in the world. I was invited too, but not as an executive. Arthur told me he needed me there to handle the technical demos in case the Wi-Fi went down or a laptop crashed. He called me his insurance policy. He told me to wear something professional, but not too flashy. I bought a simple black dress. I felt like a ghost walking through those halls. I saw the gold-leafed invitations. I saw the champagne that cost $400 a bottle. I thought about my father's oily hands and his old mechanic shirt. I thought about how hard he worked for so little. The anger was there, but it was cold. It wasn't a fire, it was ice. I realized that Arthur didn't just want my labor. He wanted my silence. He wanted to pretend that I didn't exist while I built his fortune. I decided that the IPO party would be the night the ghost finally spoke. The months leading up to the IPO were intense. Arthur and Julian were desperate to show the investors that Vantage Tech was unhackable. They didn't know that the only reason they hadn't been hacked was because Aegis was secretly protecting them for free. I had set up a trial version of my security shield on their servers 2 years ago, and I had never turned it off. It was the only thing standing between Vantage Tech and total destruction. In March 2026, the trial period was set to expire. I knew that the moment I pulled that shield, the synergy and strategy wouldn't mean a thing. On the morning of the big dinner, I walked into Arthur's office one last time to ask for the promotion. I wanted to give him a chance to be a good man. I wanted to see if he would finally recognize the person who had saved him. When he told me I didn't have the skills and mocked my ceiling, I knew the mercy phase was over. I nodded. I smiled. I walked out. I went to my desk and opened my personal laptop. I typed in a command that would change everything. Deactivate Aegis Shield. License expired. I hit enter. Immediately, the silent protection that had kept Vantage Tech safe for years vanished. I didn't do anything illegal. I simply stopped giving away my expensive software for free. I watched the monitors as the first red alerts began to pop up. These weren't hacks yet, just system warnings. Vantage Tech's core was now exposed to the open internet. It was like leaving the vault of a bank wide open in the middle of a crowded street. I packed my bag. I didn't take anything that belonged to the company. I left my badge on the desk. I walked out of the building and drove to the hotel where the 19 guests were waiting. I was 30 minutes early. I sat in the lobby and watched the news. Arthur Vance was trending on Twitter. People were excited about the IPO. They thought they were investing in the future. They didn't know the future had just walked out the door and was currently sitting in a black dress, drinking a glass of water. At 6:30 p.m., the guests arrived. They were the elite of the tech world, men and women who managed billions of dollars. They gathered in the ballroom, which was decorated with white orchids and crystal chandeliers. Arthur was in his element. He was laughing, shaking hands, and telling everyone how Vantage Tech was the most secure platform in history. Julian was by his side, nodding like a bobblehead. I stood at the back of the room, near the catering staff. No one looked at me. To them, I was just another staff member. My mother once told me that the most powerful person in the room is often the one everyone ignores. I felt that power now. It was heavy and quiet. At 7 p.m., Arthur stood on the stage to give his presentation. He held up his tablet to show the live security metrics of the company. Look at this, he bragged. 0 vulnerabilities. Total stability. This is why you are here. This is why we are the best. He didn't see the tiny red blinking light in the corner of his screen. But I did. Suddenly, the tablet in Arthur's hand hissed. The large screen behind him, which was supposed to show a graph of projected earnings, flickered and turned bright red. A single sentence appeared in bold black letters: security license expired. System vulnerable. The laughter in the room died instantly. The 19 investors leaned forward, their faces shifting from boredom to concern. Arthur started tapping the screen frantically. Iris, he yelled into the crowd, forgetting his own executive presence. Iris, where are you? Fix this. The guests turned their heads, looking for the person Arthur was screaming for. I didn't move. I stayed in the shadows. Julian tried to step in. It's just a glitch, he shouted. We'll have it back up in a second. But it wasn't a glitch. Every computer in the ballroom started making a high-pitched chirping sound. It was the sound of a system failing. The skills that Arthur said I lacked were now the only thing that could save his $200 million payout. He looked desperate. He looked small. He looked exactly like the man he was, a salesman with nothing to sell. I finally stepped forward into the light. The room went silent as the 19 investors saw me. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't sweating. I looked like a person who was exactly where she was supposed to be. Arthur rushed toward me, grabbing my arm. Iris, thank God, he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. Fix it. Now. I'll give you the raise. I'll give you $20,000. Just make that red screen go away before they leave. I gently pulled my arm away from his grip. Arthur, I said, my voice carrying through the quiet ballroom, I don't work for you anymore. I resigned at 9 a.m. this morning. You told me I reached my ceiling, remember? I decided to take a step you couldn't control. The lead investor, a woman named Janet from a massive venture capital firm, stood up. What does she mean, Arthur? Who is this? Arthur stammered. She's the lead dev. She's being difficult. Janet looked at me, her eyes sharp. Are you the one who built the Vantage Tech Core? I nodded. I built it all. And I also built the security shield that just expired. Janet walked over to me, ignoring Arthur completely. Why did it expire? She asked. Because Vantage Tech never bought the license, I explained. They've been using a trial version of a software called Aegis Security for 2 years. I am the owner of Aegis. I gave them plenty of warnings, but the CEO decided that technical skills weren't worth the investment. He preferred to spend the budget on Julian's salary and this party. A gasp went through the room. The 19 investors looked at Julian, who was trying to hide behind a giant flower arrangement. Arthur was shaking. You own Aegis? He gasped. That's impossible. Aegis is a multi-million-dollar firm. You're Iris. I smiled at him. I am Iris Thorne. And I am the person who owns the ground you are standing on. Janet looked at the red screen and then back at me. Can you fix it? She asked. I can, I said. But not as an employee of Vantage Tech. Aegis is a business. If you want the shield back up, the terms have changed. Arthur tried to take control again. Now look here, Iris, this is blackmail. I'll sue you. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. Janet turned to him with a look of pure disgust. Shut up, Arthur, she snapped. You just lied to 19 investors about your security status. You're lucky if you don't go to prison. Then she turned to me. What are your terms? I had prepared for this moment for years. I pulled a folder out of my bag. I want a 51% controlling interest in Vantage Tech, I said. I want Arthur and Julian removed from the board immediately. I want a full audit of the executive expenses. And I want the company rebranded as Aegis Vantage. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the windows outside. Arthur looked like he was going to have a heart attack. 51%. He choked out. That's my company. You can't take my company. I looked at him with the same pitying smile he had given me that morning. It's not your company anymore, Arthur. It's a pile of broken code. Without my signature, it's worth 0. The 19 investors huddled together. They didn't even look at Arthur or Julian. They were talking about the liability, the risk, and the fact that the IPO was now dead unless they moved fast. Janet came back to me. We agreed to the terms, she said, but we need the system up now. We have a reputation to protect. I nodded and opened my laptop. I didn't need to do much. I just had to reactivate the license. Within 10 seconds, the red screen vanished. The high-pitched chirping stopped. The green metrics returned. The ballroom felt like it had been held underwater and was finally breathing again. Arthur slumped into a chair, his face gray. Julian was already texting his father, likely looking for a way to escape. The 19 guests began to leave, but they weren't angry with me. They were stopping to shake my hand. They were giving me their business cards. They recognized the one thing Arthur never could. The person with the skill is the person with the power. The next morning, the news hit the headlines. Vantage Tech IPO halted amid leadership shakeup. Mystery developer takes control of tech giant. I went to the office at 9 a.m. I wasn't the girl in the studio apartment anymore. I was the woman who had just saved the company. I walked into the executive suite. Arthur was there, packing his gold pens into a cardboard box. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. He looked broken. Julian was already gone. His father had pulled him out the night before to avoid the legal fallout. I sat down in the chair behind the big oak desk. It felt comfortable. It felt right. My father was right. I knew how the engine worked, and now I owned the car. I called a meeting of the entire staff. They were terrified. They thought they were all going to be fired. I stood in front of them and told them the truth. I told them that from now on, hard work and skill would be the only things that mattered. No more synergy. No more disruption. Just excellence. The first month was a whirlwind of audits and restructuring. I found out that Arthur had spent over $2 million of company money on personal travel, expensive dinners, and consulting fees for his friends. I cut it all. I used that money to give raises to the developers and support staff who had been ignored for years. I moved out of my studio apartment and into a quiet house with a garden. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy a private jet. I bought a new toolbox for my father's old tools and put it in the garage. I kept his mechanic's shirt in a frame in my office. It reminded me that the skills Arthur mocked were the foundation of everything. The company, now Aegis Vantage, began to thrive. We weren't just a logistics platform anymore. We were a security powerhouse. The investors were happy. The employees were happy. And for the first time in my life, I was happy. I had taken a step Arthur couldn't control, and it had led me exactly where I needed to be. 1 year later, I was sitting in a cafe, reading the news. I saw a small article in the back of the business section. Arthur Vance had tried to start a new company, but no one would invest. He was being sued by several former partners for breach of contract. He was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. I didn't feel joy at his failure. I just felt a deep sense of justice. He had believed that his words and his suits were enough to win. He had forgotten that the world is built by people who know how to fix things. I finished my coffee and walked back to my office. As I passed the conference room, I saw a young woman sitting at the table, looking nervous. She was a junior dev, and she was there to ask for a promotion. I walked in and sat down across from her. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't laugh. I looked her in the eye and said, "Tell me about what you've built." Because in my company, that's the only thing that matters. The transition wasn't perfect. There were legal battles and long nights. Some people didn't like that a 27-year-old was in charge. They called me lucky. They called me a hacker. I let them talk. I let them think whatever they wanted. I focused on the code. I focused on the people. I realized that the best revenge isn't a loud outburst or a public shaming. The best revenge is living a life so successful that your enemies become irrelevant. Arthur Vance was no longer a threat. He was a ghost of a version of the world that was dying. A world where the salesman ruled the builder. I was part of the new world. A world where the mechanic owned the car. I hired a new VP of strategy, not a billionaire's son, but a man who had worked his way up from the mailroom. He didn't talk about synergy. He talked about efficiency. He talked about truth. We were a team. We were a family that actually cared about each other. I often think about that night at the hotel. The guests, the white orchids, the red screen. It feels like a movie now, but it was the most real moment of my life. It was the moment I realized that my worth wasn't something Arthur Vance could give me. It was something I already had. I just had to be brave enough to claim it. I had spent so many years waiting for permission to succeed. I was waiting for him to say I was good enough. I was waiting for him to open the door. When he slammed it in my face, he did me a favor. He forced me to climb through the window and take the whole building. That's the lesson I want to share with anyone who feels like they're hitting a ceiling. The ceiling isn't there to stop you. It's there to show you that you've outgrown the room. It's time to move to a bigger house. Or better yet, build one yourself. The audit of Vantage Tech revealed even deeper secrets. Arthur hadn't just overspent. He had ignored major security warnings for months because fixing them would have hurt the quarterly numbers. He was willing to risk the entire company to keep his stock price high. It was the ultimate betrayal of his employees and his investors. When I presented the findings to the board, they were horrified. They realized that if I hadn't taken control, the company would have collapsed within months. Janet told me I was the smartest investment she had ever made. I told her I wasn't an investment, I was a partner. I made sure that every employee at Aegis Vantage had equity in the company. I wanted them to know that when the company won, they won. I wanted them to feel the pride of ownership. Because a person who owns something will always work harder than a person who is just renting their time. My father used to say that you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Arthur treated the developers like furniture. He treated the janitors like ghosts. I made it a point to know everyone's name. I wanted to hear their ideas. One of the best security features we launched in 2026 came from a suggestion by a junior support staff member. She noticed a pattern in customer complaints that the VP of strategy had ignored for a year. I gave her a bonus and a promotion. I wanted her to know that her skills mattered. The culture of the company shifted from fear to curiosity. We weren't afraid to make mistakes. We were only afraid of staying silent. I realized that my father's mechanic shop was a better model for a business than any Harvard MBA textbook. It was about solving the problem, not talking about the problem. As the IPO finally went through under the Aegis Vantage name, the valuation was $400 million, double what Arthur had projected. The investors were thrilled. I was now worth over $200 million. I stood on the floor of the stock exchange, wearing my black dress and my father's old watch. I thought about the $100 Amazon gift card. I thought about the ceiling. I thought about the 19 guests. When the bell rang, I didn't cheer. I just took a deep breath and felt the weight of the moment. I had done it. I had protected my father's legacy and built my own. I wasn't a secret weapon anymore. I was the leader I always knew I could be. I had the executive presence of someone who actually knew what she was talking about. And that was the most powerful presence of all. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Arthur Vance. He was asking for a loan. He said he was in a tight spot and that he had always been like a father to me. He said he deserved a share of the success because he was the one who gave me my start. I read the letter twice. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel a need to respond with an insult. I just put the letter in the shredder. He still didn't get it. He still thought success was something you could talk your way into. He still thought he could manipulate his way to the top. He was a man stuck in the past, and I had no room for him in my future. I had a company to run. I had a world to secure. I had a life to live. And I didn't owe him a single cent. The story of Aegis Vantage became a textbook case of a successful hostile takeover by an internal employee. But to me, it wasn't a takeover. It was an awakening. It was the moment the builders realized they didn't need the sellers. It was the moment the quiet girl in the studio apartment realized she was a titan. I hope my story inspires other builders to look at their bosses and ask, does this person actually know how the engine works? And if the answer is no, I hope they have the courage to take a step that can't be controlled. I hope they start their own Aegis. I hope they build their own shields. Because the world needs more mechanics and fewer salesmen. The world needs more people who are willing to do the work and fewer people who are willing to take the credit. I am Iris Thorne. I am 27 years old. My boss said I didn't have the skills to move up. He said I reached my ceiling. He was wrong. I didn't just move up, I moved beyond. I took the step he couldn't control, and I found a world where I finally mattered. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I am a builder, a leader, and a daughter who made her father proud. My seat at the table wasn't given to me. I built the table myself. And there is plenty of room for anyone else who is willing to do the same. So, if you're feeling underestimated today, just remember, the person who knows how the engine works always owns the car. You just have to be the one to turn the key. And when you do, don't look back. The road ahead is yours, and there is no ceiling in sight. Just the open sky and the power of your own two hands.